You're listening to the Destroyers of Fake News, Kristan T. Harris and Don Pye Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.
It's that time again. Time to relax and kick up your feet. Grab your favorite beverage and tune in to the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.
It seems I've gained the world, but have nothing to keep tabs upon. This loss isn't wasted time. Face opportunities to recognize. Now we have the time. Rebuke. Don't choke on this twisted dream, 'cause he'll say paper the whole sum. He'll say magnified pain is point number one. He'll say paper the whole sum. To magnify pain is point number one. 'Cause it seems I've gained the world, but I have nothing to keep tabs upon. This loss isn't wasted time. Face opportunities to recognize. Now we have the time. Rebuke. Don't choke on this twisted dream, 'cause he'll say paper. Yeah, the whole sum. To magnify pain is point number one.
Rundown Live, Milwaukee's independent news and talk radio. I'm your host, Kriston T. Harris. Riding shotgun with me is Don Vai Jr., and we have a great show for you guys, as always. As there's a lot going on in the news, make sure you guys punch that like button, share the live feed, drop some comments in the chat, and you can support us by going to therundownlive.com and donating right on our website. You can donate as low as $3, $5, $10. All that money goes towards supporting this broadcast and helping us upgrade the RNCs in Milwaukee. As you know, we are Milwaukee's #1 independent news and talk radio, broadcasting live to you out of the home of KGRA-DB, KGRADB.com, home to Clyde Lewis and Ground Zero, as well as John B. Wells and Caravan to Midnight, Popeye from Rabbit Hole Radio, and a bunch of other very interesting characters. Mark D'Antonio has a show on there. He's on our broadcast often. Top astronomer in the world. Fascinating individual. But today's broadcast, we have a great guest joining us. Gennady Stolyarov will be driving along with us in the back seat here, as we're going to dive into transhumanism. And we're going to dive into Ukraine, robot war, brain chip surgery, brain chip interfaces, and how robots are just taking over everything today, Don. I opened up the news and I was like, the first thing that popped up was Ukraine. Everyone's talking about Ukraine and Russia right now in the mall attack. And everyone I know that's knowledgeable and has had a little inkling of curiosity and conspiracies of all almost systematically agreed that the CIA is responsible for what happened in Russia. But we don't know that. Right. We don't know that. But it's funny how so many people are jumping the gun. It's like, that smells like a government, U.S. government, government psyop. And I'll tell you, all right, I know who did it, guys. It's the same people who did the Nord Stream oil thingy. Was that natural gas Nord Stream pipeline?
Right.
Yeah, right. That's probably the same people, but I don't know for sure. But I think it might be, right? That's what everyone is pretty much saying, is the same bad guys responsible for Nordstrom might be responsible for the shooting going on in Russia. So do you know what happened? Do you know any details about this, Don?
So essentially what happened was that there was a huge terrorist attack at one of those places you put on a play, a theater. That's the word I was looking for.
Was there just a warning to avoid theaters?
Well, yeah, actually. But yeah, so there was this big attack at a Russian theater in Moscow. There was a shooting, multiple shooters, about 40 people were dead, over 100 injured. And then the attackers set fire to the theater. And originally there was a little bit of fake news floating around earlier that suggested that ISIS, the Islamic State, took credit for the attack. But since then, Russian media has come out and said there isn't any credible information to substantiate that. So we're still not entirely sure who's responsible for it. But there was some information that came out. I saw a number of individuals sharing it directly from the U.S. State Department website, where just it was either just a few weeks ago that the U.S. State Department issued a warning to U.S. Citizens in Russia to avoid going to theaters and large gatherings and things of that nature. And not to be one of those people to jump the gun, but I said, that sounds to me kind of like the quiet kid telling you to stay home from school tomorrow. It just seems
right. So this is a terrible thing. First of all, I don't have a horse in this race one way or another, whether it's Russia or Ukraine. All I know is people on both sides are suffering.
Right.
And, of course I don't support Nazis, so the Azov battalion's out of it. But, they might claim this. I'm surprised they haven't come out and been like, yeah, we did this, Right. But then again, I don't think that anyone in Ukraine would admit to doing this, because then Russia would bring down more wrath. And I don't know, man. It's like the idea to burn it down afterwards to destroy any evidence.
Right.
I mean, It almost sounds like our intel that we had from the CIA, which works overseas. They must have known about this somehow. Somehow somebody knew, and this was either allowed to happen, it'll come out, or, were any of
the official story that the Associated Press is spinning is essentially that these warnings were issued by the U.S. State Department and a number of other Western nations. And this is the official Western line, that Putin was told about it, but he disregarded it and ignored it because he just figured it was Western attempts at intimidating Russia. We're not exactly sure whether or not that's the case. Russian intelligence probably had some sort of inkling that something was going to happen, because well, it's the intelligence community. But yeah, this whole thing stinks of a possibility of being a covert attack. We just had that big report out of the New York Times confirming what we all already knew. Mainstream media always late to the party. Just recently confirming that the CIA has basically been at war with Russia for the past 10 years, out of waging covert warfare inside of Russia, out of CIA outposts in Ukraine, long since before this conflict started. And of course, there's always been these reports that have come out every once in a while saying that Ukraine has been given the permission to launch attacks inside of Russia from other powerful Western nations. We have the information about Nord Stream 2, as we alluded to, most likely a CIA job that's, coming from Seymour Hersh, very reputable former mainstream, now independent journalist who broke stories like the My Lai massacre during Vietnam. And we also have those reports from the Gray Zone showing confidential documents that it was actually UK intelligence that pushed Ukraine into committing attacks on the Kerch Bridge. So we know that the Western intelligence agencies have had their hands on a number of attacks that have taken place inside Russia already. So it's certainly
well to warn Russia that it's going to happen, then have it happen. That's almost like me saying, Don, if I come over, I'm going to steal your wallet, and then I come over and your wallet's missing.
Right.
Who's the first person you're going to think may have stolen your wallet? Now, I'm not saying the United States had anything to do with this. First
of course not.
I'm just like, if you were going to do like any kind of research on this, and you were trying to, bring together suspects, and I said, hey, I'm going to steal your wallet, and then I come over and your wallet's missing, do you think I might be a suspect in that crime?
Right. And another thing that's worth contemplating is the fact that we know that Putin is no angel, right? He just won this big election. We know that the Russian security services and intelligence services are certainly, not this altruistic, benevolent force. So it could easily be that, everybody's jumping the gun and saying CIA, CIA. It could very be a calculated move where they say, okay, well, they're going to jump the gun and blame the U.S. anyway, so let's false flag this. Let's get some Russian support going, do a false flag. Everybody's going to blame the CIA. And so we really don't know. But if it was the Islamic State, if it was ISIS, another thought that crossed my mind earlier before it came out that there was no official.
Well, they got video of these guys, so they should be able to figure out ethnicity at least, wouldn't you think?
Right. Well, when the fake news was circulating earlier that ISIS had claimed responsibility for the attack, the one thing that came across my mind is, ISIS is a product of the U.S. intelligence, the same way that ISIS was. So, or the same way that Al-Qaeda was. So, it's just one of those things. It's very, very fishy, man. And, certainly we're going to get some information about this within the coming days. So I'm definitely going to stay plugged into it.
Well, we're going to definitely have an interesting week on the Rundown Live talking about this, because this is definitely captivating the news. And the reason why we're really here today is to talk robots with you guys. So we just wanted to bring you, because that is breaking news, and we wanted to dive into it. And there's a lot of people that are interested in it. But we have a great guest joining us, and there's a lot that we have to cover news-wise that we didn't get a chance to cover this week. And for those who are hearing this on Monday, because this broadcast will air Monday on kgradb.com, it's interesting because this news isn't going to be old news by Monday. We're going to have other stuff coming out. But in the news today and recently, I've been seeing many of these reports announcing that our population is dropping. It's dropping incredibly. And in this article, the world's population, the world's population to fall for the first time since the Black Death. This was published yesterday. The world population is expected to fall for the first time since the Black Death because of the plummeting birth rates, a Lancet study has found. How are we overpopulated as a planet if numbers are dropping all of a sudden? Just like Elon Musk suggested. Remember, he was a wild wacko. And I'm not saying that he isn't. I'm just saying he was right about this.
Right. It's one of those things where it's like these two things cannot exist at the same time. They cannot be both true simultaneously. Either the world is overpopulated, or our population is falling at an increasing rate, and we're facing a fertility crisis, and numbers are dropping exponentially. Well, if numbers were dropping exponentially when we were previously overpopulated, then it wouldn't be a crisis worth reporting as a crisis, right? So it's one of those, cognitive dissonance things that just, doesn't.
Well, I'm putting Gennady Stolyarov in charge of getting the population back up. So get busy, buddy. Get busy. You're responsible. I don't know what Jeffrey Epstein's plan was, but Gennady's a smart guy. We need a bunch of little baby Gennadys walking around there. I wonder how he feels about that. World's population to fall for the first time since Black Death. In other news along this topic, global fertility rate to keep plummeting, major story warned. So, Mike, first of all, when I thought, what is causing the world's population to shrink? Well, the first thing you think of is people just don't want to have babies anymore. The economy sucks, right? People just there's more effective birth control than ever, or you would think. And that might be a major cause. But then I started to see in the same day of news, this article from 2 days ago, global fertility rate to keep plummeting. Major studies warns, and I'm sure Gennady Stolyarov is going to suggest designer babies and artificial womb facilities to solve the issue. I don't want to say that I know, but I kind of have an idea where he might go with this. But no, that might be a legit thing though. Like, first of all, why are global fertility rates plummeting? Well, remember when they said that you get the little jabby jab and that it may cause infertility of up to 88% or something like that of females? Wasn't Bill Gates on TV? It was some kind of, I'm not going to try to get the percentage exactly, but it was a large percent. It was like over 70%. He said like, oh, about 70% infertility. What?
Right.
So, like,
and it's interesting. You think back to that TEDx talk that Gates gave,
lowering carbon emissions, which we're starting to find out is a whole false narrative with
exactly
climate change.
But that whole lowering carbon emissions things, if we do a really good job with, I don't remember all the things he listed off, but he listed off a number of things, and we do a good job with, birth control and
reproductive healthcare and reproductive services. Yeah,
right,
nailed it. Yeah,
and we can lower the world's population, and it's just one of those things where another important factor to bring up when it comes to talking about this subject is the fact that this is a trending. Or something that we're seeing continue to trend in certainly a negative way over the past few years. There have been a number of stories coming out talking about the global fertility rate plummeting, dropping off worse and worse. And you think, well, why is that? Well, if you certainly look at things like a number of pharmaceuticals, well, a lot of these things also have, negative impacts on an individual's fertility. You look at things like the chemicals in our food and the water, particularly with regard to Monsanto GMOs and carcinogens and the toxic additives and the pesticides. All of these things are detrimental to fertility, and so it's really no wonder that fertility is dropping around the world.
Yeah, no wonder, none whatsoever. I'm not curious at all. They literally told us what they were going to do, and they're carrying it out, and we're just like, yep, no big deal. And then on a whole other aspect of craziness, is it romantic to die together, Don?
I've never been one to subscribe to the whole Romeo and Juliet mentality. I want to live, thanks.
Well, so dying together, saying I love you, couples euthanasia in Netherlands. It's a 2-minute read on Microsoft's MSN.com, basically suggesting that they died together holding hands. Their last words were, I love you. It's so romantic to let the government kill you, right? Bert Kaiser, 77-year-old Dutch doctor, has helped more than 125 people to die. But his case hit him hard because this time it was a couple. 2 superb women. Monique, 74, suffered from dementia, and Lowe's, 88, from a muscular disease. They relied on each other for independent life, and after 50 years together, could not imagine life without each other. Kaiser described their final moments. The 2 women lay in bed holding hands. They both had a drip in their arm, and the doctor at the side, and he told AFP, It was at American Free Press. They kissed and said, "Thank you," and "I love you." We looked at each other and said, "Are you ready, girls?" "Yes, let's go," they replied. We injected the medication, barbiturate, and they fell asleep immediately. I'm just saying they're promoting death. Dr. Death, that's the guy's name.
Right.
I mean, what do? I kill people legally. And I guess, I don't know, some people, the libertarians, there's like a libertarian philosophy that you should have the right to choose when you go out. And I guess if that's the case, you could always take yourself out. But I always looked at it as a selfish thing.
Yeah, well, I agree with the whole mentality of, people should be able to make the decision of, when to go when they want to, especially, if you're in a situation like these two people, they're, toward the twilight of their years, probably don't have many years left anyway. They both have very painful degenerative diseases. I mean, I can understand why someone might want to go out that way. Not that I would personally go that route, but then again, I've never been 77 years old with a painful degenerative disease, so I don't know. But it's just one of those things where in this particular circumstance, I can see, why they would want to, and, why they should certainly have that choice to do so. In the overall scheme of things, I also see the detriment of allowing or rather promoting this idea of, let the state kill you, oh yeah, go ahead and kill yourself, sort of thing. Like, it's,
well, what about people with depression?
Right.
Like, when does it start being predatory? You're depressed today? No problem. We can help you check out. Don't worry, the state will take care of your 2 kids.
Exactly.
Or 3 kids, right?
We've already seen similar things like that in Canada, and we know how bad Canada is about that shit. Yeah.
And it's scary to think about, but today we're going to be talking about extending life with Gennady, so that's going to be interesting. He'll be joining us in a few minutes here, so for those that are listening, but the idea that doctors are going to just like check you out, it's kind of weird to me. Just the whole thought that somebody wouldn't want to live, but I'm not that person. I don't struggle with depression. And at what point does the government start saying, "Hey, you're depressed, let's take you out"? But
not to mention the fact, I mean, as someone who has, thankfully it's not a big issue with me anymore, but I have struggled with mental health since I was a child, and I've been on a number of medications when I was a teenager, and those medications made it worse. When I was on Zoloft, it made me want to kill myself. I was like, get me off this shit. This is not helping.
So before Gennady joins us, I wanted to go over about 10 articles real quick, like in under 2 minutes or 3 minutes here. Mostly because there's breaking news. Elon Musk's Neuralink demonstrates first person who can control a computer and play video games just by thinking. But guess what game he's playing, Don? Out of all games, like, which one? Like, I was figuring that he'd be playing Pong like the monkeys. Well, nope. Dude's playing chess.
Oh, wow.
Look at that guy. Just sitting there. He's playing chess online. And I don't know if he won or he lost or what the difficulties were behind it. But essentially, he's using his brain chip interface to move the chess pieces.
That's incredible. I've always wanted to learn how to play chess.
Yeah, without your hands. Is that like first of all, that's like bad ass. Tell me that's not a cool thing. First of all, I love chess. But imagine this is like the closest thing to we would call this synthetic telepathy, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not synthetic telepathy, then what is it?
What would it be? Synthetic telepathy. The first example, a man with a brain chip interface playing chess online. And I mean, pretty cool stuff. So that's in the news, right? Also, there's a restaurant in Chicago, close to me here in Milwaukee, because Milwaukee is about hour from Chicago. Robots now serving in restaurants in Chicago. Some restaurants have started using service robots to help staff with basic tasks. The bulk of the robots in Chicago's restaurants were sold by one woman who began sourcing them from China. China robots. Oh, are we going to ban all the robots because they're from China, like TikTok? Maybe. Are we going to ban Hollywood since 6 of the 7 studios is owned by China? Are we going to ban the roads that China owns too? I don't know. Help her own staff stay safe during the early days of COVID-19 pandemic. Now she's a major distributor both in Chicago and Asia. A lot of the customers like the robot because they are really cute, said Stephanie Gong, one of the first restaurateurs to bring robots onto the dining room floor into the kitchen. Pretty cool stuff. In the U.S. Sun, we got more robots. iRobot, chilling rise of Chinese humanoid robots with calls for one in every home and workforce to be replaced with droid army. Since we're talking economic singularity today, right, Don? And when we're talking about this, I mentioned, I think like 5 years ago, or maybe at least when you first started at one of our broadcasts, that I believe in 10 or 20 years, robots will be as common in the house as a cell phone or iPhone or iPad.
Yeah, I can certainly see that being the case. It's one of those things where this technology is developing incredibly quickly, and just some of the examples of robots that we saw earlier this week. You remember that video where the robots moving
fluidly, right? Yeah.
All that sort of stuff. I mean, I can absolutely see. Yeah, I can certainly see even within a decade that we'll have some sort of early version of that. Probably not like the perfect iRobot, sci-fi model, but certainly an early version of it.
Here it is. Book expert, how robots have become trusted surgical assistants. That's right. Robots are surgical assistants. Pretty cool stuff. Your assistant at your dentist might be a robot. In the news today, talking about robots are just in the news all over the place this week. And what's crazy is, Don, we just had somebody on that was a teacher, and we're talking to robots. And I want to mention that the mainstream media reporters listen to this broadcast. They do. I know that for a fact because they reached out to me during Kenosha and a bunch of other things. People from the New York Times, CNN, all these things. They get their ideas a lot of times from broadcasts like ours because we're way ahead of the curve. And I remember, Don, I was doing an episode. And I was like, be a nice guy. If you see someone that has a Bernie Sanders sign in their yard, shovel their driveway. Even if you do have a Trump sign, even if that you are a Trump supporter, it should be nice to other people. And then literally the next day, there's a article that came out that's racist of your, or don't accept your neighbor Trump supporter to shovel your driveway, that's racist or something like that. And I was like, I knew that they listened to this broadcast. Like, they emailed me, right? Yeah. And I'm in their books. I'm in these CNN guys' books they're writing about stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And will robots replace teachers? We just had a teacher on. Here it is in the news.
Yeah, it's a valid question because, especially when we're talking about these sort of, robots and the development of these sort of technologies, becoming integrated into the workforce and, taking jobs away from regular people, making them more efficient, increasing the production of things of that nature. I can see that being the case as well. I mean, there's going to be a lot of cases where essentially robots are taking, the brunt of a lot of work that, sometimes people might not want to do. I mean, I know there's plenty of people out there who, still enjoy being teachers, but I know a number of teachers and they've all said that, it's getting a lot harder, especially with a number of things with the way children act now. There's, kids are a lot rowdier now. And also just, decreases of funding and just dumb things that schools have to go through with government people.
Well, first of all, obviously robots are going to be able to do cool voices that nobody else can do. So they're going to make education interesting. I had a monotone English teacher, so obviously I'm bitter, right? So, but they're cool. They're going to be able to do cool things. What was that?
I had a cool English teacher, man, in the sixth grade. She was a hard ass, but I actually really appreciated, her strictness in the classroom. Her name was Miss Bini Amisa. She was from Ghana, West Africa. She was cool as hell.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang explains why he's all in on humanoid robots. Also, in the news today, robots are entering the Ukraine battlefield, stopping killer robots. Robots are here. Robots are entering the Ukraine battlefield. Like I always talked about, I would just retire from everything and just fight robots all day if I could do that. Just create robots and do battle bots all day. That's my real dream in life, is just to retire and do battle bots. And if I can extend my life to live to be 500 years and be a battle bot champion of Mech Warrior, I would do it because that's all I really want to do with my life. So I don't know. But yeah, so all these kind of things. So robots in the military, AI is going to be incredible. This is all part of the conversation we're about to have. with none other than the great Gennady Stolyarov, who has been on the show, great guest on this broadcast. And you know what? Gennady, I think, has his own Wikipedia page. I don't know how that happened, but Gennady Stolyarov has his own Wikipedia page. And just for those that want to see it, he was born in 1987, a libertarian and transhumanist writer, actuary, and civil servant, known for his book, Death is Wrong. Welcome to the broadcast, Gennady Stolyarov. I appreciate you joining us today to talk about this madness of economic singularity, which I'm terrified of, but at the same time, I'm told that a very beautiful world could come from the ashes of this chaos.
Thank you, Kristan and Don. It's a pleasure to speak with you. As always, this is my third appearance on the Rundown Live, and I always appreciate you highlighting many of the pivotal issues that affect the world and stand to affect our future. Often these issues are not discussed nearly to the extent that they should be in the mainstream media, and I appreciate the opportunity to have an open conversation with you about them.
First of all, Gennady, I want to say that I'm thankful that we have a gatekeeper and a mind like yours involved in transhumanism. And now I don't mean a gatekeeper in a bad way, but somebody that kind of helps normalize the chaos, because there's a lot of leftist leaning and progressive minds, and to be a libertarian in a large leftist pool like that, it's not easy. And you definitely are one of the better techno optimists out there, and you give me a hope that, and you inspire me, and you should inspire other people as well to get involved in this conversation, because there's a lot of people that bring about the doom and gloom of technology, and I'm one of them. I'm not going to lie. I bring up a lot of the awareness, but at the same time, I do let my listeners know there's this wonderful utopia type world we could have because of this technology. It's up to us to decide how we use it and which way it goes. And economic singularity, everyone's saying, well, it's here, it's coming, it's already started. Robots are taking over jobs in the workforce. So what are humans going to do? And we've faced this before with automation in, car dealerships and everything else. There's savings to be involved. The savings are passed on to the people. And, maybe there'll be new jobs like space archaeology or bio-hybrid roboticists or whatever you want to call them, but there's going to be new work that's just going to take re-education. And this is going to be a very big pivotal change in our society that we're going to see coming up from everything that Don and I can gather. We are here. And nobody knows it. It's like, well, one day everyone's going to wake up and there's going to be the robot walking down the street. They're already seeing it. It's wheeling like a transformer. It's like, roll out. Let's go. Here's your pizza.
Yes, indeed. And I have actually seen little robots delivering food already at university campuses. I believe the company is actually called Starship, but they're these little, essentially squat robots on wheels, and you can put a hot meal in them. They'll keep it warm, and they can transport it across university campus. It works really well if they don't have to cross the streets, for example. But I have seen those for a few years, and I think they're an excellent idea. In most applications, robotics are going to greatly improve the quality and convenience of human life. And I think the people who worry about these robots making all human labor obsolete are being overly pessimistic. I agree with you. There will need to be some re-specialization, retraining, and rethinking the human being's relationship to the economy. But it's not going to be catastrophic. At least it doesn't need to be, unless human stupidity gets in the way. And what I mean by this is sometimes people are overly attached to prior economic arrangements despite their suboptimality, and they will react in ways that make beneficial change more difficult. So, for example, if there are special protectionist measures implemented saying, well, you're required to use a human for the following tasks, that could actually slow down or inhibit the deployment of beneficial automation. Or if people try to pass laws that institutionalize certain employment arrangements. We're already seeing this with, for instance, the 40-hour work week, which was an achievement back in the 19th century when most people worked much longer hours, especially in factories, sometimes under very unfavorable conditions detrimental to health. But that arrangement was institutionalized at the behest of labor unions. And right now, many jobs do not require 40 hours per week to achieve a certain level of productivity. But a lot of people feel pressured, especially with this backlash against work from home that has happened in recent years, to go into the office and essentially underutilize their time during much of that time, because there's more of a FaceTime culture. Like, you have to be there and account for your presence rather than account for your productivity by what you actually accomplish. So in this age of knowledge work and often digital production, it is better not to have fixed hours. It is better to have productivity targets for people. That's my outlook. But current institutions dating back to labor union pressure in the 19th century and early 20th century lead these obsolete arrangements to persist and become cultural norms. So I worry actually about situations where institutions don't adapt quickly enough to the economic singularity and don't give people viable options for a transition where their human skill sets, which are still quite relevant and complementary to robots and AI, can be most effectively deployed.
Right. It's sort of the adaptability of humanity has been one of the main things that I've really been thinking about since having this conversation about economic singularity at the beginning of this week. Sort of thinking about how essentially when automobiles came about, the men who would shoe the horses and draw the buggies. Well, they were all put out of work, but then they got new jobs and things of that nature, where it's just human beings throughout our entire history have demonstrated this propensity to being able to adapt and change to circumstances. And I think that we're going to see the exact same thing here with the economic singularity. And even if a singularity doesn't take place, or doesn't take place as soon as we assume it will, say maybe once we're all dead and gone it'll occur, who knows, whatever, that there's going to be an adaptation to really sort of find your way into it. I wrote an article just recently called How to Use AI as a Tool for Unity, based off of the conversation that we had with Tom Ross, and the part of that conversation with regard to communication. And that's sort of the basis of that article, is how we can use AI as a means of enhancing communication across cross-cultural barriers and things of that nature. And one of the things I point out toward the end of the article, that the same way the liberty movement adapted to the digital age, and we used our cell phones and our connectivity through the internet and laptops and things of that nature to foster this burgeoning liberty movement across the globe, whereas previously it had been confined in the analog era to fringe radio shows and newspaper leaflets you can get. We created this massive international community of people who are fighting for freedom and liberty and putting these ideas into the world. We can and most definitely should be doing the same thing with this technology, because it's sort of, old saying is you can't unring a bell. It's here. And so it's best to work along with it rather than to try to fight against it, because that would only serve to our detriment in the end.
Good idiom. I wish we could put down points. Ding, idiom point. I love idioms.
Indeed. So, Don, actually in 2008, I wrote an article called Liberation by Internet, How Technology Destroys Tyranny. And this article was published, among other outlets, by the Mises Institute. So it was prominent in libertarian circles at the time. And I made this very argument that technology offers a set of tools for liberation where individuals become hyper empowered and in some cases more powerful than oppressive or authoritarian regimes. And I think this was largely the case until about, I would say, 2016, though certainly the tables had been turned on us, those of us who favor individual liberty during the pandemic, especially because essentially there was this really rather troubling alliance between big government and big tech. And technology platforms, especially Facebook, YouTube, and the old Twitter, were pressured to censor information, sometimes information that didn't even quite go against the mainstream narrative, but used keywords that triggered automated censorship. So, for example, I'm a supporter of vaccines, including vaccines against COVID-19. I've been vaccinated 5 times myself. The vaccines have never had adverse effects on me. COVID had some adverse effects on me, on the other hand. So I have been very vocal about my pro-vaccine stance. But in 2021, we did a YouTube stream, one of our weekly virtual enlightenment salons that we do every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And one of our officers, Zach Richardson, was presenting a refutation of some data presented by vaccine skeptics. And he was essentially presenting this chart of data, and he was explaining why those skeptics were incorrect in his view. So theoretically, YouTube should not have had a problem with what Zach was discussing. But I think because he provided screenshots of that graph that had been circulating, and he used words like vaccine and COVID and other words that essentially triggered the attention of these censorship algorithms, my video was flagged and it was removed. And I appealed, and almost instantly, my appeal was rejected. I don't think a human being ever reviewed my appeal. And essentially, I still have a YouTube warning on my channel, although I was now able to take their sensitivity training and given a promise that the warning would be removed from my channel on April, because I went through the motions and I gave them.
Are you more sensitive now, Gennady? And do you feel like you got to touch your inner YouTube sympathetic self? You can feel more sensitive towards your other YouTubers now.
I am very sensitive to what will trigger the YouTube algorithm. And interestingly enough, this
Sounds
is
like
not
a relationship.
This is not just limited to the topic of vaccines. For instance, there was a section on abortion misinformation, which is startling to me, that YouTube would take positions on what people may or may not say about the abortion issue, especially because this is primarily a political controversy and it's a wedge issue in the United States. And
Not a scientific one, is what you're saying.
right, right. And people have strong opinions on both sides. Of course, we in the Transhumanist Party intentionally do not take a position on the abortion issue as a contemporary controversy, though you did mention artificial wombs earlier in your broadcast, and we think artificial wombs are a solution to the abortion issue. They reconcile the rights of the woman to choose to continue or not to continue her pregnancy, and the right of the fetus to life for those who perceive such a right to exist. So,
and people who can't have a child, they
right.
could have a baby in the artificial womb. They'll walk
Absolutely.
out of some artificial womb syrup, and then the mom's gonna see and be like, "I wish that's my boy." That's definitely what would happen. But but you're right. If somebody didn't want to have a kid and abortion was an issue, they'd have the option to donate that cell to an artificial womb or artificial womb facility. Somebody would have to pay for it nonetheless. But I'm sure there'd be some Christian donors or religious donors that would be like, "Hey, if we can save that life, and this is a way to do it." Is it negative? Is it really negative? And I looked and I had to do some soul searching about designer babies. That's CRISPR gene editing. That's a whole different thing with with artificial womb facilities, but we don't need to get into that right now. But the fact that they could save babies' lives by putting them in an artificial womb, if a mother didn't want it, that's a fascinating concept, Gennady. That's
yes,
a very
indeed.
but naturally transhumanists are pro-life because they want to live forever, right? So
we want to live longer, better,
right.
Have a greater variety of life forms in existence, including genetically enhanced humans. These could be enhancements for longevity or various kinds of functional capabilities. But in our Transhumanist Bill of Rights, version 3.0, we also discuss the potential of other life forms emerging. So our transhumanist Bill of Rights encompasses not just human beings, but sentient entities. So hypothetically, if we do come into contact with extraterrestrial intelligences, or if a sentient artificial general intelligence emerges, or if we uplift animals in the future, those would be rights-bearing entities. And I actually don't think this is in conflict with a lot of the logical implications of what many conservatives believe, because a lot of these seemingly irreconcilable conflicts about rights are really technical problems. So if the reason why a woman's termination of her pregnancy leads to the death of the fetus is essentially the very barbaric stage in which our medicine is today, that today's doctors don't have the tools to save that fetus, then by encouraging the advancement of these technologies, we can actually achieve the objectives of these pro-life advocates, but we can achieve those objectives in a way that would have fewer adverse consequences for the women, because pregnancy, so-called natural pregnancy, is a very dangerous process. It still is. Child mortality.
John, that would make a great article. Get on that. Write that one down. Like, I mean, these are the type of stories that the media isn't paying attention to, and that's not the real, like, when they put this news out there, it's never really in a way that you could go, this could be used to really save a lot of lives and foster children that may be unwanted or unwanted pregnancies, and be able to prevent some of these things like late-term abortions and give women another solution other than, kill or let it or give birth. You know what I'm saying? And maybe some women don't want to ruin their body and they want to have a baby that way,
Yeah.
So if this technology works, I think it's a fascinating thing. And I'm not technically against it. Not at all. I just was wondering, maybe what are some of the side effects? These kids come out, green, or do they have hyper intelligence, or are they a little slow if they get the artificial womb? I don't know, but I'm interested to see how science prevails in this scenario. And when we're talking about, economic singularity, this is also part of that. Are we going to have a government-run hospital then, and artificial womb facilities where the government covers everything? Well, government never ever covers anything. It always comes from the taxpayers some way, shape, or form. I would love to say there's going to be economic singularity where we're going to be like, yep, everything's free. Get a UBI, and government is wonderful and peaceful. There is no war, and nobody's ever going to abuse this, and the robots aren't taking over. But there's some weird individual out there that didn't grow up like all of us, are like, yeah, I'm going to take over all these robots, and I'm going to put on one of these computer to brain interfaces, and I'm going to control them all, and I'm going to try to take over the world. Yeah. And I'm not going to say that really is going to happen in real life, but it's interesting because the potential is there for all these possibilities. And when we're taking a look at the economic singularity, where do you think this is going to lead us? What are some of the progressions you plan or you think are going to happen here, or are already happening here, Gennady?
So you touched on so many fascinating topics.
I'm sorry. I will do that.
Address them in turn. So first of all, the basic premise of an artificial womb, and some have been experimented on today, for instance, with sheep fetuses. And these artificial wombs, at their most basic functionality, just provide the nutrients and the environment, the amniotic fluid, and other necessary features for that fetus to mature to term. So hypothetically, you could have an artificial womb, and the baby that's born is genetically, biologically, completely identical to today's humans. Just like a baby that is created via IVF, in vitro fertilization, is genetically and biologically identical to any other human. There's no extra special set of features for that kind of person. And they've been around for over 40 years now. So genetic engineering, of course, is a separate question, and it's possible to do genetic engineering now. It's possible to do gene therapies. It's possible to do embryonic gene editing, and some scientists in China have claimed that they have already done so. There's a famous case of a Chinese scientist who essentially engineered resistance to HIV in 2 babies.
Who are still alive, allegedly.
Right, who are still alive and well, as far as I'm aware. But that's a separate topic. So could there be genetically engineered fetuses incubated in artificial wombs? Yes, but those are 2 separate technologies. And I would actually support both. I would support both because you could get rid of a lot of inherited genetic diseases like Huntington's disease, which kills people in their late 30s if they survive to that long. You could get rid of a lot of propensities for cancer or heart disease. For instance, Felix Mendelssohn, the great German composer, he died at the age of 39 of a stroke, but essentially all of his family had this extremely early propensity for strokes, and they died in their 30s or 40s or 50s consistently. So a lot of great minds were wiped out very early in their lives because of these genetic predispositions. So imagine even the baseline case where we can get every human being to the level of health that many of us enjoy today through gene editing. Why is that bad? And then we take it a little further. Why not give a little more of a health improvement? Why not give a little more of a longevity improvement? Why is that bad? Theoretically, a lot of conservatives would not mind living to 100 or 110 or 120. And why would it be bad to live another year or another 10 years after that? Now, I'm not a biblical literalist, but there are accounts in the book of Genesis of exceptionally long-lived ancestors up to 969
Methuselah.
years.
Yeah.
Yes, for Methuselah. And the Methuselah Foundation, one of the organizations that I personally support and that the Transhumanist Party certainly supports, was named after Methuselah because they're actually trying to bring about that kind of longevity. And why is that bad? It's in the Bible. So I would encourage your conservative audience to think about it this way. This is getting people to good health. This is getting people to the kind of longevity that we think scientifically would be attainable. And it could resolve a lot of problems in our society, including the problems of high medical care costs, because right now the medical system has to deal with all of these debilitating illnesses. So that's on the subject of artificial wombs. But you asked more generally about the economic singularity and the transition and how that is to be addressed or managed. I do think a universal basic income is a good idea, but it has to be a true unconditional universal basic income.
Not
So
one,
I know
not one. I mentioned that social credit score base because I think that's the way they're going to do it because that would make the most sense for government, anyways.
Right. And we would, of course, strongly disagree with that in the Transhumanist Party. We don't think any basic income works unless it's unconditional, unless it's applicable to everyone, has no strings attached. No matter whether you're a multi-billionaire or a homeless person on the street, you get the same amount every year, no matter what you do, no matter whether you earn other income. Because if you have conditionality, then you start needing to have a huge welfare bureaucracy to administer it. And in the United States, a lot more money is spent on the welfare bureaucracies than on actually giving people aid. And unfortunately, I have to say this, a lot of the political pressure from conservatives is responsible for this because the conservatives want to be assured that the aid recipients are worthy, that they're not going to use this money to buy alcohol or drugs, that they're going to try to seek employment, that they're not going to be on welfare forever. And I can see their concerns because this is taxpayer money right now that is being spent. So they don't want taxpayer money being spent.
Well, the solution is worse than the problem is where you're going.
Right, right. But it costs so much money to verify this eligibility that it's actually a bigger drain on our taxes than if all of that pot of money that's currently collected for welfare were just distributed unconditionally to the recipients. But I would say it should go even further than that because you don't need to have taxes to fund a UBI at all. You could have a combination of private initiatives. So some entrepreneurs have proposed a blockchain-based UBI where you essentially just provide proof of identity and you get a UBI via a crypto token. But the Transhumanist Party also advocates a proposal that was first formulated by our founder, Zoltan Istvan, whom you've also had on the Rundown Live, called the federal land dividend. And the premise for the federal land dividend is there's a huge amount of unused federal land right now that could be put to productive use, that could be leased to private corporations. And of course, we will make exceptions for notable landmarks, national parks, national forests, beautiful monuments that we don't want to be destroyed, or tourist attractions that we don't want to be disturbed. But there's a lot of barren land. About 84% of Nevada, for instance, where I live, is federally owned land that is not put to any use whatsoever. And a bit of it gets leased, but a lot of it is just empty. If you drive through central Nevada, you will go for hundreds of miles sometimes without encountering significant habitation. So imagine if that land could be put to use, and there could be mining operations, ranching operations, irrigation could be deployed in that area, make it more fertile for growing crops. And the revenue from those leases can go to fund a basic income. Now, lest people think this is some sort of fantastical idea, the state of Alaska already does something similar with its permanent fund, because the state of Alaska has a policy where its oil revenues are considered to be the property of the citizens of Alaska. So if you are a citizen of the state of Alaska, every year you get a check ranging from a few.
Really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Look up the Alaska Permanent Fund, ranging from a few $100 to a few $1,000s a year in good years. And Alaska is a very Republican conservative state. Nobody in Alaska, whether they're right wing or left wing or none of the above, objects to the permanent fund. They gladly collect their permanent fund revenues, and they don't have to demonstrate eligibility. They can have other jobs, other income, and that's the key. Another conservative argument against welfare has been that it's a disincentive to work, because if you find a job, you lose your welfare benefits. And any sort of system that penalizes working, that penalizes productive activity, in my view, is undesirable. But by making the UBI unconditional, you give people an incentive to improve their financial situation, because honestly, the size of the UBI is not going to be satisfactory for most people. It'll be enough to enable people not to starve, to have some basic shelter, and we do need to bring the costs of housing down in order to achieve this. The Transhumanist Party supports efforts to massively increase home construction through emerging technologies.
3D printing?
Yes, yeah. 3D printing of homes. We have even proposed essentially a project to provide housing for all homeless individuals through 3D printing of homes, and also aligning their incentives so that they actually own those homes. They have an incentive to take care of them, and they live in communities where they're not allowed to have alcohol or drugs, so that the most common causes of continuing homelessness are addressed. But a UBI would be in addition to that. So a UBI doesn't have any strings attached, and people will still want to improve their financial situation. I don't know of anybody who would say be content with an income of $12,000 a year. That was Andrew Yang's proposed UBI of $1,000 a year. Our UBI would be variable, so it would depend on how much revenue actually comes in from these federal leases. So it could be greater, it could be less than $1,000 a month, but $12,000 a year is a bare bones standard of
pays
living.
Rent, right? At least, at the very least, you know.
But
in some places,
it could take some of the pressure off of people, and then people might have longer term aspirations. And I think most of them will still want to work for a living, but they'll want to be a bit more meticulous about how they plan their careers. Maybe they'll spend a bit more time building up their skill sets. Maybe they'll be a bit more discerning about which employers they choose to work for. And then those employers will have an incentive to treat their workforce better, because they know that people have options. And I think that's key. In any sort of libertarian society that works, it's going to work because of choice and competition and free association, so that people don't feel like they're locked into particular arrangements out of economic necessity. And again, there are so many obsolete institutions in the United States that tend to lock people in. For example, during World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt froze wages and prices, and people's incomes were actually capped at $25,000 a year. So what did employers do to counteract that? They started offering other benefits like health insurance, for instance. So health insurance came to be tied to people's jobs. And right now, health insurance outside of a particular job, usually a job with a large corporation that can afford to pay for a generous group health insurance policy, is really expensive. Health insurance on the individual market is sometimes prohibitively costly. So a lot of people feel like they have to work at these large corporate jobs in order to get the healthcare that they need. So what if we have advances in healthcare that bring down the cost and decouple that type of arrangement from employment? And what if we have a UBI that can pay for those healthcare costs? I think that would be tremendously liberating to individuals. But we can't have a social credit score. We are completely opposed to social credit systems in the USTP. Obviously, the Chinese system is very overtly authoritarian, but it's possible to have...
It's friendly. It's friendly, Gennady. just don't be a bad citizen, and then you can fly.
It's possible. It's possible to have emergent social credit systems without them being centrally planned. And that's the issue we could run into in the West, because so much of our data are now available to third parties through data brokers who can sell the data, and other entities that can create scoring algorithms with the data. And you don't need AI to do that. This happens today already. You need certain, I call them dumb algorithms, to distinguish them from smart algorithms of the future. But I've said I am more concerned about the dumb algorithms of today than I am about the smart algorithms of the future, because dumb algorithms are used to censor on social media. Imagine if those algorithms can be used to mine the texts of your posts or your search queries, and then determine some sort of adverse treatment on that basis. So I do think we need frameworks to protect individual privacy, to enable ownership over our own data, so that we determine who gets to use it, and we are the gatekeepers of our own information. And I think that's a key part of the transition as well. And we can monetize it too. So if we have the ability to give permission for other entities to use our data, they could be required to pay us little revenue streams. If they profit from our information, we get a cut of that. And that could be part of the income that we get, again, separate from a UBI, but an additional income stream. We need a diversification of income streams to get through this period, which some have called the economic singularity.
I think that's one of the interesting facts about it that I've also been recently thinking about is certainly with regard to all these conversations about the economic singularity, that's been one of the key factors that has stuck out to me, is the necessitation of the diversification of assets or income, essentially, finding ways to continue this. And we're already at that point, kind of, where everybody kind of needs a side hustle. Everybody kind of needs some sort of extra way to make money, just because of the detrimental effects of, say, rising inflation and the devaluation of the dollar via the Federal Reserve policies and all of these other monetary mishandlings and things of that nature. And so it sort of brings us to this crossing point, if you will, where it's we have these options available, and we have these things that need to certainly be confronted now. And I think that's why these sort of conversations are absolutely necessary, because as I mentioned earlier, these technologies are here, they're going to continue to develop, and congruently to that, these issues are going to continue to proliferate themselves. The economy is going to continue to get worse. The dollar is going to continue to devalue. The federal or the national debt is going to continue to rise. And so, if we can find a way out of that very obviously manufactured crisis by way of, proliferating the advancement of these sort of technologies or some other methodology, or combining one idea with another. It's absolutely something that needs to be very prominent in the public discourse.
Yes, absolutely. And I think diversification is generally a sound strategy to pursue. Of course, it is well recognized in the mainstream that one should diversify one's investments, but I think the principle applies more broadly. One should diversify one's revenue sources. One should diversify the assets that one owns in the physical world as well, because it's not all about money, by the way. So the pandemic has taught us a really important lesson, and that is it is important to have stockpiles of physical goods on hand. And I'm not a prepper, by the way. I am.
How dare you, Gennady? You better start prepping.
So, but it's interesting because I did not suffer from the toilet paper shortage. I tended to buy a little bit extra prior to the pandemic occurring, and it was just a habit of mine to have, let's say, about 60 rolls on hand at minimum. And I thought I was kind of slacking before the lockdowns began, but that stockpile actually got me through the acute shortage. But the key is to escape this just-in-time mentality that pervaded our society and our supply chains prior to the pandemic in about the 3 decades preceding 2020, where in search for essentially squeezing out that little competitive advantage, businesses hyper-optimized their supply chains and relied on the cheapest supplier or the cheapest cost of transportation, no matter where in the world their shipments would have been traversing. And as a result, any disruption anywhere to that hyper-optimized supply chain triggered a cascade of effects. And many of these businesses didn't have enough inventory on hand, didn't have a backup plan to deal with those supply disruptions. So we had periods in this country since the start of the pandemic when lumber was essentially unavailable. Used cars were essentially unavailable. And it seemed for a while that every few months, another basic component of our production processes or our consumption needs was unavailable. And I think we need to render both our production processes and our supply chains much more robust and redundant, not just chase the lowest cost option, but always have multiple backup options. And that means we need to have production capacity in the United States for every single kind of good. And yes, sometimes it'll be more expensive, sometimes it'll be idle, but during times of crisis and disruption, like what we have gone through, we will be grateful for having that. But in our personal lives too, we
It'll
need to
still
have
be
redundancy.
cheaper than the inflation that we're paying.
Oh, yes.
Is where you're going with it. Because, what we saw is, video cards for computers cost 3 times as much of it as the computer, right? And people having these old video cards and computers are selling them $800, $900, $1,200, and it's like, wow. Parts for vehicles impossible to get. People waiting months to get their cars fixed. It was wild, and toilet paper was sold out everywhere. And then all of a sudden we saw the size of toilet paper shrink. It used to be this wide, and then it got this wide, and then this wide, and then, and then the next thing you know, you're using sandpaper. But it was wild. It's a crazy time to think about how the shelves got barren. There's a lot of things that went into that, but yes, it's very important for our listeners out there to be prepared. I think, Don, didn't you just write an article, 50 items to look into if you're going to prepare for hard times?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago for the Rundown Live, I wrote that article based off of one of the episodes that we did of just gear and equipment and things of that nature that people should have on hand for any number of circumstances. I covered or I mentioned in the article rather that it's not necessarily definitive. Here's what you need for a nuclear, apocalypse, but it could be here's what you could need if a nuke is dropped, or perhaps a bad hurricane wrecks your area. Bad things happen, and it's certainly advisable to ensure that you're at least ready and capable of being able to make it through those bad times.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you mention that, because in certain respects, the old Soviet Union actually had a superior approach to this kind of preparation, in particular against nuclear war. So about 40 million housing units that were constructed during that Soviet era have underground fallout shelters. And these are just city apartment blocks. And if there was one thing that the Soviet government was really good at, it is mass construction of cheap but durable housing units. So this is why the former USSR does not really have homelessness, because so many of these housing units were constructed during essentially the period from the end of World War II to about the 1970s. And many of them are still in use. They're obviously not up to the same standards in terms of comfort that most American homes are. But in a nuclear war, you could go down into those basements and be quite a bit better protected than most Americans are going to be in their homes, other than the few who can afford to build luxury bunkers for themselves and their families. So I do think there's value in having the infrastructure of a society being hyper resilient, prepared for the extreme situations. Now, am I going to purchase a bunker for myself right now? No, because it would be out of reach for me as a private individual. If I had $1 million, I might reconsider that option. However, I think a lot of these questions of resilience actually need to be addressed society-wide. Let's provide a more proximate example. I hope nuclear war won't happen. I do think it's the greatest existential risk, but we have other non-existential but serious risks in this country. So wildfires, for example, are an immense risk in the western United States. In northern Nevada, where I live, we don't get as many destructive wildfires directly, but we get the smoke from a lot of those California wildfires. So we blame California for this. But there were periods in 2021 when the air quality index, or AQI, in my area was above 600. Now, anything above 100 is considered to be unhealthy. So essentially, I evacuated to the Midwest during that period of time. But I was thinking about, how do we manage this wildfire risk to essentially prevent these horrible smoke inundations? And in California, they have a problem with a lot of dead brush in huge forested areas, unused federal land that nobody cleans up, that nobody maintains. So why don't we develop robots that can help clean up this area? And as a way of employing humans, why don't we hire crews of humans to go into those forests and also pick up the twigs and branches and dismember the fallen trees in situations that might be a bit too particular for robots, like unique situations where you still need the human discernment of what to do.
Chippy the wood chipper robot, huh?
Yeah.
That's
well,
what
combine them. Combine humans and robots, because they work well together synergistically. But this would be a great jobs program, and also a great way to teach people that automation is not their enemy, because these robots could help with a lot of the heavy lifting, so to speak, a lot of the more dangerous tasks, but the humans will still be there to guide them. And I think that would be a great partnership, and it would greatly diminish the wildfire risk. Certainly right now, the efforts to reduce the flammable vegetation in California are woefully insufficient, and we need to scale up those efforts immensely.
Yeah, Don and I have been talking for a while about how we're just frustrated that robots aren't available to do basic human things like laundry and taking out the trash and cleaning or loading and unloading the dishwasher or doing dishes themselves. But we're starting to see that some of these humanoid robots are getting very close to being almost humanesque in doing their daily tasks, mowing lawns. And I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that we'll have Chippy the wood chipper robot working alongside to get rid of that brush. But I don't know how many Americans are ready yet to allow robots in with open arms, but I think it's getting there. We have Alexa, we have Google, we have Siri, we have Bixby, we have all these AI automated things that make our lives a lot more convenient. You know, I can talk to my phone and be like, hey, Google, schedule an appointment 5 o'clock today, blah, 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 Gennady Stolyarov. We're going to have him on the show, and find me all the information you can on him. And then I'll go through your Wikipedia page, which you got and I'm jealous about, and, you know, all that other stuff. And we can talk about it. And it's amazing in so many shapes and forms when we talk about automation and humans working side by side with it, because I think that there's that opportunity. But I know we mentioned, in a little bit to backtrack, about universal basic income. The way I see everything being steered versus where a lot of these great ideas in the USTP are, you know, top of in the forefront of your politics, is that the government and the multinational corporatists have very little interest in a UBI that isn't financially beneficial to them. And that's my concern about the central banking digital currency, because once we start talking about what they are looking to do, well, who's to say they don't turn it off so you can only buy a certain amount of goods, which, you know, in welfare money, you know, you get that $12,000 a year, like Yang was suggesting. Sure, maybe you can only use it for rent or food or bills, which is cool. They can limit that, right? But at the same time, the idea of just like one coin to rule them all, central banking digital currency, and tying that into UBI, I start to immediately get disheartened. But I think there's going to be competition there. So it's an interesting subject when we talk about economic singularity. Automation is crazy. People are dating AI robots. You got AI girlfriends and AI boyfriends. You know, it just, the world is very different, Gennady, in the last 10 years, and I don't know how to take it and swallow it all. I just don't, you know?
Indeed. Well, there has certainly been a huge change societally as well as economically from these emerging technologies. And I'll speak to cryptocurrencies as well, because the Transhumanist Party supports cryptocurrencies, but we support decentralized cryptocurrencies that are intended to increase the privacy of transactions and individuals' ability to have control over their transactions. Now, we have seen, however, that whenever humans are involved, even if some of the mechanisms of the financial instruments are intended to protect against fraud and abuse still insinuate themselves into the system, because the moment you have third-party intermediaries like cryptocurrency exchanges, or you have some sort of third-party monitoring or reporting to governments. For instance, right now, Coinbase has to report information about you to federal agencies, just like any bank would. You start getting some of the same problems as in the legacy financial system. And I do get concerned about the prospect of a central bank digital currency, but I do wonder to what extent we don't already primarily rely on digital transactions mediated by banks that are members of the Federal Reserve System, when we use our credit cards, when we do online banking, when we make transactions online. We don't exchange pieces of paper anymore. Even the fiat money pieces of paper that used to be backed by gold until FDR took the US off the gold standard in 1933. So I wonder, in day-to-day practice, if there were a central bank digital currency, would it be that much different from today's electronic transactions? The only key, I think, that is important to preserve is the ability to have physical cash. Because if you have physical cash that's outside of that system, then you can still make transactions that aren't monitored in that way or subject to that kind of centralized control. So that is my thinking on this. Clearly, I would welcome a world where money is more decentralized, where individuals have options that aren't under the control of the central government. And I think technology could be more of an enabler for a solution there as well. But in terms of AI relationships and so forth, I think it's important to keep in mind AIs are not sentient yet. They're remarkably capable. They are tools that can sometimes master certain domains very effectively, but to jump across domains and to have the kind of versatility that human beings have now would require the advent of what is called artificial general intelligence. So if you want to have an interesting conversation with a chatbot, or you want to have ChatGPT write you a story, or if you want to have DALL-E 3 generate you a work of art, that's great. And I'm all in favor of deploying and adopting these tools. But I want humans to be clear-headed about what these tools can and cannot do. And if humans think that they can get some sort of emotional connection with the AI, they're not capable of emotional connection. Not now. Not while they're still narrow AIs that aren't sentient. And what people are really getting is the illusion of an emotional connection, something that perhaps satisfies their feelings or their longings. But I would suggest that desire is better channeled toward improving the external world, the physical world. And this is where some thinkers in Silicon Valley, people like Mark Andreessen, Tyler Cowen, Peter Thiel, have distinguished between the world of bits and the world of atoms. So we've had a lot of progress in the world of bits. But unfortunately, in the world of atoms, we've had slower growth and in some areas stagnation since about the 1970s. And I think one caution that we need to take with regard to the world of bits is we can't let it distract us from the world of atoms too much. That is to say, we still live fundamentally in the world of atoms. Our bodies are physical and biological. We navigate through physical infrastructure, and physical infrastructure even underlies our ability to enjoy the world of bits. So people should engage themselves in the world of bits, but they should think, how does this translate into the world of atoms? How is the world of atoms being made better by this? And not get stuck in essentially trickery, illusions that ensnare them in the world of bits without a broader external significance. And this is me talking as a philosopher. So
what I get from all this, Gennady, is that I need to clone a girlfriend and then download those bits into the atoms, and then we have a collaboration of both. No, I'm just kidding.
An android, that's what you're talking about.
Well, I guess, artificial intelligence, the device is artificial, but the intelligence is becoming more and more real. And I don't know, man, it's going to be indistinguishable at some point. And I think you're right. Like I was joking about the girlfriend thing. I have a wonderful girl, but it's one of those things where people are going to think like that. People are going to think, well, I can just take this bits and put it to atoms, and we're already cloning dogs, right? We're already cloning animals. And why not just start cloning? Or like if I wanted to sell my body DNA blueprint and somebody wanted to download them into that person's blueprint, why not? It'll be like 6 different KTHs walking around, but I make money off of each of those. I don't know.
So each of your clones would still be a separate human with their own self-awareness and their own rights. And this is the difference. So clones, actually right now, the technology used for cloning, if it were to generate clones of you, first of all, they would be, say, 40 years
Handsome.
Younger than you.
Okay.
But second, they would be less genetically similar to you than an identical twin, a biological identical twin that you might hypothetically have would be. So there's still variation that gets introduced in the course of the cloning process. So I think there is this stereotypical conception of clones as being extensions of the original individual. But no, they're separate individuals. They just look like you, have similar genetics to you, but their life paths are going to diverge. Likewise, I would go even further. If a technology were developed to copy you atom by atom and instantiate another version of you right next to you, that person might have your memories and might think that he's you, but he would go off and have his own experiences from that point forward, and you would not be aware of his experiences unless he told you. And you might maybe have a bit of a better idea of how he would act, but he would still not be you. You would continue to be you and have your own experiences. And if somebody made the argument that, oh, this person is a replacement for you, be very careful about that, because that's not a continuation of what I call your I-ness, your vantage point upon the world. That individual will have a different I-ness. And I would say that individual would still be a full rights-bearing entity and would be entitled to the same rights as you. So you wouldn't be able to enslave him. You wouldn't be able to earn money off of him. You would have an interesting time discussing, well, who owns the property that you accumulated throughout your life. And I would be inclined to say it would be the original you, because the original you actually went through the physical motions of accumulating that property, and that other person was just instantiated a moment ago, so he has to start anew. Sorry for him, but that is his predicament in life. But I think this is why it's important to get the question of rights right. And that's why it's important to think as a rational individualist when considering these questions.
Well, in the future, aren't we going to be able to just share our memories then with the clone with through brain computer interfaces? Like, and then this way they'd be able to download everything and know everything I know. And so it'd be very hard to differentiate the difference between the two, obviously. So, it's interesting because I think there's a group of individuals, wealthy or not, that would want to clone and have a backup in case they passed away, so they could just download that data into another person. And like you mentioned, another option is having a clone for backup body parts. I had this conversation with somebody from Rockwell Automation who just invested in synthetic biology to clone human body parts. And I said, well, why not just clone the whole person while you're at it? Just surgically remove them. But it's a different entity. Don't get me wrong, but we are almost at that point where we could do something of that nature, and it is controversial.
So we can certainly clone organs, and if you clone a separate organ, there's no problem with that, obviously. So there have already been 3D printed body parts, even as early as 12 years ago. Dr. Anthony Atala and his team 3D printed tracheas, essentially. Tracheas are very difficult to replace otherwise, and they saved some patients' lives from that. Of course, if you have like a hollow organ, like a tube, essentially, it's easier to do that than to replicate a very complex organ like a heart or a lung. But there have been miniature models of human hearts that were created. And a lot of these are called organoids. Organoids are used in experiments to essentially simulate the effect of particular substances or particular treatments in a way that you don't have to do it on an actual human being. Now, I am a bit wary of this idea of creating for instance, an entire headless clone of a human body for transplantation, because I'm not sure that consciousness is entirely localized in the brain. You have a nervous system that extends throughout the body. And I don't, for instance, subscribe to the idea of what's called neuropreservation, which is cryonic preservation of just the head. I suppose it's better than nothing, but I would be in favor of full body cryopreservation, because full body cryopreservation would hypothetically give you a chance to restore connections throughout your nervous system as well. So I would say that's a controversial area, because you do wonder that nervous system in that headless clone, to what extent would it have the ability to sense something? So I think it is better to consider incremental processes, incremental repairs to the organism, and becoming really good at that at the cellular and molecular level. That's what the SENS damage repair approach is about. SENS stands for Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence. And this is an approach where Dr. Aubrey de Grey of the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, where I am also the treasurer now, has identified back in the early 2000s 7 principal types of damage that occur at the cellular and molecular level. And these are well recognized by mainstream science. They have been known since at least the 1980s. And the idea is to repair these types of damage periodically without really altering the metabolism of the body or how it works. So the body still accumulates damage over time. It's just every decade or 2 decades, we clean it up and we set back the biological clock. And we give ourselves more time for technologies to advance to make those therapies even better and even more effective. And that way we can stay ahead of whatever causes of damage would ultimately make us age or make us susceptible to disease. So I think that's a better way than creating headless clones. And again, with separate organs, if you need a heart transplant, if you need a kidney transplant, hopefully they will be able to grow those without the need to clone an entire headless version of you.
Yeah, I know. I put the Blummies definition on the screen because that is what came to my mind, was that old Greek mythological person where the face is on the chest and they have no head, the headless Blummies, allegedly, and they were believed to live on some island somewhere. But yeah, cloning somebody's entire body to harvest their body parts, it's a very dystopic thought process. But I also thought about cloning for war, but now we got robots. Robots are doing war. It was in the news today that robots have entered the Ukrainian war against Russia. And
Yes.
And it's interesting to see now that robots are going to be playing a bigger part in the military, which does not surprise me. And it seems like we're seeing an uptick in robots in authoritarian hands. Like they want to get the AI going. They want the robots. There's a major race on AI. I think whoever has the best AI out there is probably going to win the war, is the way it's looking. And when we're looking at the structure of AI and how human like ChatGPT is becoming, it's almost scary that it realizes that we are trying to manipulate it at times. And when we look at this, Gennady, where do you see AI going, especially when we're talking about the militarization of automation and the military? Because after the robots fight with robots and the losing robots lose, the Decepticons or Autobots, then it's the humans. And I think that's when things start getting a little bit more scary.
So this is a nuanced issue, and I have a multifaceted perspective on this. First of all, I would encourage people to look up a short story of mine called The Fate of War, which I wrote in 2007. And this is about a future where war essentially evolves into entirely robotic combat. So it ceases to be robots fighting people. It becomes essentially battle bots, what you were talking about, Kristan, where robots are fighting other robots, and the countries of the world come to agree to have this combat by robots determine whatever geopolitical outcomes that they wish to accomplish, so that they don't have to spend human lives and they don't have to destroy actual infrastructure. So if country X wants to occupy a territory held by country Y, it's better for that territory to maintain its productive infrastructure too. So you don't want to destroy the factories. You don't want to destroy essentially anything that could be used from a productive standpoint. And this is another essay that I wrote called The Real War and Why Interhuman Wars Are a Distraction. And this talks about our common enemy, which is death, and what I call ruin, essentially. Any sort of decay, any sort of deterioration of the good systems that we rely upon and benefit from. So this is very much an anti-war essay. The story called The Fate of War is one where we essentially evolve beyond using humans in war altogether. And the benefit of this is that, yes, the robots can do all of the fighting, and the progress of civilization doesn't get derailed by war, even if humans still resort to war as a means of conflict resolution. So I hope we can eventually get to that future. But in the meantime, of course, it is troubling if robots are deployed against humans, because obviously humans stand less of a chance in that situation, and that could inflate the casualty count on the other side. What I will say is the United States has used a lot of drones in its wars abroad. And sometimes those drones, piloted by humans remotely, have made mistakes. And they have killed innocent civilians because the operator thought that he was targeting terrorists. Russia and Ukraine both use drones extensively in their war effort, and they have done so essentially since the start of the war in Ukraine. Now, these robots that the Ukrainian military is deploying are remote controlled ground robots. So they can do things like sweep for mines, they can provide logistical support, they can provide some combat support as well. But I would say they're the ground equivalent of drones. They're not truly autonomous killing machines. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I am sure the Russian military has robots like this in development as well. It's just the Ukrainian military beat them to it. And I can understand why the Ukrainian military is deploying those robots, because they have a manpower shortage and they've had a brutal mobilization already, where when the war started, the Ukrainian government actually prohibited people from the ages of 18 to 60, men from the ages of 18 to 60, from leaving Ukraine. Russia has also had some forced mobilizations, but they were milder in scope. So most young men in Russia have not been forced to fight yet at this point. But the Ukrainian military is running out of men, unfortunately. A lot of them have been killed. So I'm not surprised that they're using robots to try to hold the front lines. And it's better to use robots than to send humans in waves of pointless attacks like the Ukrainian counteroffensive ended up being. So I hope that the Russian military actually does deploy more robots, because that would save Russian lives as well. And I want more lives to be saved on both sides of this conflict. I think this conflict is a huge waste of good men who are needed. So you mentioned the declining fertility rates throughout the world.
Well, you're going to sell that, Gennady. We decided that you're gonna all the replicas in the future. It's your job to mate with as many females as possible and save the civilization. You and Elon Musk need to hang out.
I have some different options, like extending human lifespan so that people are healthy and youthful for as long as they wish to be. But another component of the solution is, let's not kill young men. Let's not send them to die unnecessarily for the geopolitical ambitions of ruling elites, both in Russia and in Western countries, that just use these men as chess pieces, as pawns in these needless rivalries. So how do we preserve as many young men as possible from Eastern European countries where the fertility rates are already very low? They've been below replacement for a few decades. We don't send them to the front. And we try to also get a diplomatic resolution to this terrible war. But in the meantime, since it seems both sides are intransigent right now, I think they should be using these remote-controlled robots to save human lives.
Well, right now, I saw this article that just came up and I showed it on the screen. It looks as though it's robots are fighting robots in the Russia and Ukraine war now. Robots versus robots. Sounds interesting. I'm surprised somebody hasn't live streamed it. Robot, like they each have their own little live stream camera, but it's happening, and drones are happening. And I think as society progresses, we're going to see more automation, whether it's automated vehicles, which I think is running into a lot of difficulties. Automation of vehicles. I know I've talked on other shows about, what if you had a warrant? Would self-driving car take you to a police station? Probably, all these different concerns. But I'm starting to just scratch my head if we're ever going to get there with autonomous vehicles, because they're struggling. They're struggling dealing with the human factor of, just randomness and not being able to predict what a lot of other vehicles may or may not do, which are normal human functions while driving.
So autonomous vehicles do have some of these struggles. However, it's important to keep the statistics in mind. So autonomous vehicles are still massively safer per number of miles driven, say per million miles driven. They have orders of magnitude fewer accidents and fewer errors than human drivers. About 95% of all accidents and all road fatalities are caused by human error. So these are situations that are avoidable. But the autonomous vehicles do make weird mistakes, especially in situations of bad weather, or if there's a strange object, like sometimes they've mistaken trucks, especially white trucks or fire trucks, for example, for empty space or for some object that they could disregard. So I think a lot of people are reluctant to adopt autonomous vehicles because they see these situations where a human being could obviously have avoided the accident, but the autonomous vehicle didn't. But as Frédéric Bastiat, the famous 19th century classical liberal French economist, said, there's the seen and the unseen. So you have the seen, which are these strange accidents that autonomous vehicles have been involved in. But the unseen would be all the lives that were not lost because the autonomous vehicles drove correctly and more appropriately than humans would be driving in those situations. And this is where I think having some training in statistics, generally having a quantitative skill set, can really help people differentiate the reality from the hype, because you're not going to have a completely risk-free technology. Automobiles are not a risk-free technology, yet would one seriously propose that automobiles should not have been allowed to be deployed onto the roads, even though they do kill 40,000 Americans per year. But they were still superior to the horse and buggy era, where essentially in cities you would have hundreds of thousands of horses generating biohazard. And this biohazard led to infectious diseases where many people would die in their 40s or earlier. And then, of course, you still had accidents from the horse-drawn carriages, so that world wasn't accident-free. So we need to not adopt what is called the precautionary principle. Max More, the great transhumanist philosopher, likes to characterize the precautionary principle as don't do anything the first time. It's really don't do anything until you can have complete confidence that there won't be some serious risks or dangers to human beings, or in some people's conception, to the planet as a whole. So I don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to what's called the proactionary principle, which Max More formulated, which is you need to consider benefits and risks, not just of a new technology, but of the status quo, of not adopting that technology. So often people focus on the downsides of something new, a technology that they don't have experience with because it's novel, it's scary, it can be sensationalized. But they don't focus on the obvious flaws and the obvious dangers and perils of the world we inhabit today. So a lot of people are concerned about terrorism, they're concerned about killer robots, they're concerned about these remote contingencies. They're not concerned about the car accidents that are much more likely to kill them from human-operated vehicles, from drunk drivers, from just bad drivers. And they're not concerned as much about heart disease, about cancer risk, about stroke risk, about dementia risk, which are all much more likely to kill them than autonomous vehicles or terrorists. And I think as transhumanists, it is incumbent upon us to really teach people to have a more sensible assessment of risk that is driven by numbers, that is driven by statistics and probability, and focus on the greatest killers. And of course, the greatest killer of them all is aging. Aging will come for all of us. It's a 100% death rate eventually. So let's try to figure out ways to reduce death rates from all perils, and let's adopt the autonomous vehicles. Let's improve them so that they don't run into as many of these issues. And let's conquer aging as well, so that we are not all sentenced to death within 50, 60, 70, 80, or 90 years.
Gennady, what are some of these risks of economic singularity that you see that we need to be watching for, and some of the things, the directive that we can change and bring awareness to? Because I do know that there's a lot of risks coming up with this economic singularity. And as a person that tries to be aware and educate people about the risks so we can avoid them, I was kind of curious, what are some of the risks that you are seeing and problematic things that you've noticed with economic singularity heading our way?
So I would say the major risks are in the transition and the reactions from societal institutions, as well as, let's say, groups of dissatisfied humans. We can think as far back as the Luddite movement in the early 19th century in England, where dissatisfied weavers and other craftsmen essentially destroyed industrial technology for fear that it would displace them. So if there is massive technological unemployment, enough people will be dissatisfied that there might be rioting, there might be destructive activities undertaken, there might be societal breakdown, and we don't want that, which is why I have spoken about the need to offer a transitional path for people, and that includes a UBI, a true unconditional UBI, as I've said. That includes reskilling programs. That could include even compensation for people who are displaced from their jobs so that they don't have an incentive to riot, so that they might have some funds to tide them over as they reskill themselves. But it's also important to build in greater resiliency in our societies. It's important to have a cultural transformation where we recognize the opportunities rather than the threats of technological advancement. And this is where our 2024 presidential candidate, Tom Ross, whom you've interviewed, has an excellent set of ideas, essentially preparing us to see AIs as partners, as collaborators, rather than threats, and bringing out our uniquely human aspects. So in this entire discussion, I think it should stand out that I don't believe AIs or robots will make humans obsolete. They can do certain tasks that humans are actually fairly ill-suited for to begin with, and some of those tasks are dangerous, some of those tasks are tedious, and we would have our time freed up to explore our creativity and to explore what are the unique value propositions that we as individuals can bring to the world. So we would have more time to do that. And a movement like transhumanism is absolutely necessary to give people this understanding that they have options, that they don't have to be disgruntled, that they can actually use this as an opportunity to channel themselves and their activities in more productive directions. So the omni-futurists, I think, are to be saluted, and their book, Future Visions, is one that I would highly recommend because they don't just offer a single path. They offer a variety of perspectives for people to consider during this transitional era so that different individuals who might have different skill sets, who might have different strengths, will find value in these different chapters and these different approaches and create a custom tailored approach to get through these times. Now, these may be difficult times for some, but it's not like humanity hasn't lived through difficult times before. And I would rather live through this kind of transition than through, say, a world war or through a plague or through some sort of totalitarian regime. I think this is a better problem for us to have, and there are many opportunities that await on the other side.
Nadia is really well spoken. I got to ask you, completely off the wall question. What's with all the damn awards in the background? Like, you got a gazillion trophies, you have like 6,000 medals. That's a lot of bling.
Yes, indeed. So many of these are awards from debate competitions or math competitions or science awards. I have quite a few running medals as well, and awards from speech competitions. Some of these are diplomas for professional insurance designations, and these span about a 23-year period now, though many of the running medals are more recent. So the orange medals behind me are actually from virtual races that the Transhumanist Party organized in 2020 and 2021, the Victor Run virtual races. When not a lot of physical events were being held, we actually created fundraisers for our friend Victor Bjork, who is a researcher in the longevity community, and we helped raise funds for his work. We helped raise funds for some longevity organizations, and people could actually run any distance they chose and report their times, and I would have an algorithm to essentially score them according to their speed, their distance, their elevation gain. So this was an interesting event that we undertook. It was a U.S. Transhumanist Party initiative, but a lot of these awards are mementos from my various intellectual and extracurricular activities.
Impressive, quite a bit. And for the viewers or listeners at home that don't know, Gennady has a ton of awards behind him, and that's impressive, man. Don, how many awards do you have behind you?
Well, I don't have any behind me. I have a green screen behind me, but I do have
We could put up a whole bunch of awards behind you, Don. The right answer is we could green screen a whole bunch of awards in there. But Gennady, always great to have you on the broadcast. I have to say thank you for always being a rational mind and understanding the concerns. A lot of people consider me to be a technophobe, but really I just want to bring awareness to some real concerns. Although I would love to biologically live longer if that was possible. And some even mechanically to some extent. I don't know, at one part you lose your soul, but I'm sure by replacing all your body parts at some point you'd get there. That being said, Gennady, let people know where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up this book.
Yes, so please go to transhumanist-party.org for the U.S. Transhumanist Party website. Also go to my YouTube channel, which is G. Stolyarov II. So the first letter of my first name, my last name, and then the second. We have our weekly virtual enlightenment salon streams every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern time, where we have these kinds of conversations about the future and emerging technologies and philosophy and rationality as well. In terms of the Omnifuturist book, our friend Mike DeVerde shared a link previously to where you can get the book, and you can get it for free as well, but you can buy it on Amazon. It's inexpensive to get a Kindle version, so if you want to support this project, just go on Amazon and buy it. And yes, we are on KGRA as well, so our Virtual Enlightenment Salon is a fellow KGRA program, and as always, I'm appreciative to KGRA for being this platform to foster discourse in so many different areas, so many different fields that just don't get the mainstream coverage that they deserve. So I would encourage everyone to take part in the conversation, whatever your perspectives are, even if you're not a transhumanist. Go watch our Virtual Enlightenment Salons, participate in our chats, share your ideas. We will engage you on them and keep the conversation going.
Gennady Stolyarov, I appreciate you again. The Rundown Live, therundownlive.com. Thank you for joining us today. We'll have to have you back on soon when there's some crazy breaking news and just maybe to get some transhumanist updates as we're growing over here. I know you guys are growing. I've heard great things about you guys having great listenership on KGRA on Sunday nights. And it's another outlet of this broadcast where we reach a lot of people late at night. So a lot of people will be hearing this on Monday night. And I encourage you to go pick up the book by Omnifuturist called Future Visions. It's available on Amazon.com for $5. Spend some money, research economic singularity. It's a digital book, but at least it'll help feed your brain so you can grow ideas and maybe think for yourself what might be some of the current situations that you want to be aware of and be prepared for. Thank you again, Gennady. That being said, you're listening to the Rundown Live on KGRADB.com, band.video. We'll be back tomorrow. Same bad time, same bad channel, which is Tuesday. Tuesday, we got guests all week. So don't go anywhere. We'll be here, and you can donate. Support this broadcast. We're 100% listener funded. Please go to therundownlive.com and donate, even if it's $2 or $3. We don't get any of that big government money. We're not selling you a whole bunch of stuff. We sell you a shirt. We could be selling a whole bunch of everything, nutraceuticals, you name it. And maybe we will be in the future. I don't know. We did at one point. So we just kind of stripped it back to just being old school, DIY, do it yourself, DIY. So you guys have a great night. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Stay blessed.
You're listening to the Destroyers of Fake News, Kristan T. Harris and Don Pye Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.